Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here, having heard some of the speakers we've had on today already. I can't claim to be an expert, but I am going to tell you about a place that is very special to me. It's quite unique, but I think you might find some synergy with what you're trying to achieve here on Guernsey. I'm privileged to be here because I'm the Chief Executive of Whiteley Homes Trust. And Whiteley Homes Trust is a charity which was set up 100 years ago exactly. And it was set up at the bequest of William Whiteley, who left £1 million in his will and said to the Bishop of London, "Go and house the poor elderly." And at the time, there were no pensions, there was no NHS, there was no housing benefit. So what the Bishop of London did with the original trustees was he got them together and said, what are we going to do? And fortuitously, they bought a piece of land in Surrey, they employed the best architects of the day, and they built a whole village for people of retirement age and beyond. And so what we're left with today is a fabulous place with 262 Grade 2 listed almshouses, 51 extra care flats, a residential home, a nursing home where we provide end-of-life care, but a church, a shop, a village hall, a bowling green, lots of things you would expect to see in a quintessentially English village. And that's the foundation we've been able to build on as a community, and we are very lucky to have been able to do so. And there's something going on there which we can't quite put our finger on yet, but I'm going to tell you a bit about what we think is happening. And I suspect there are already questions going around in your mind of why, what, and how has this happened. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about why first. Well, why I'm here particularly, and I think this is a theme that I've noticed in many of the speakers today, is that I had an epiphany moment very early on in my career. I trained as an occupational therapist. I spent 3 years hard at work, learning, assessment, treatment, monitoring, evaluation of individuals who were patients, and I spent a lot of time thinking, how am I going to help these people be independent in their lives? And the very first book I read, and literally the very first book I read when I came out of college, was this. I was devastated. I read this book and thought, crikey, I might actually be part of a problem, not a solution in society. You know, we as professionals sometimes baffle people with science, talk our own language, and actually focus on the things that the person can't do. How is that going to help people in society today? So although I recognise we need experts and professionals for certain things in our lives, they're probably not the people we want to run our lives for us. And actually it's been my goal ever since to see what I can do to empower people to take control and take responsibility for their lives. Now, why do I think there might be some similarities between what you're trying to achieve in Guernsey and what we're already doing at Whiteley Village in Surrey? Well, first of all, we're both small islands in a big world, and I'll come back to that later. We're also pretty ambitious, and when Mark spoke to me about coming here today, what he said was, Guernsey wants to be the best place to live in the world. I think that's pretty ambitious, but we'd already set our mission at Whiteley Village to be the best place to age in Britain. And so there are definitely some similarities around ambition. Also, we don't need a passport to get in. You don't need a passport to get into Whiteley, and actually if you're from the UK, you don't need a passport to get into Guernsey. I think that says something about open communities and people that don't need bits of paper in order to be known within a community. And last but not least, and I'll come back to this again later, we are a bit quirky. I understand on Guernsey you've got blue pillar boxes. Well, up until very shortly, a little while ago, we had green pillar boxes at Whiteley Village. So I'm thinking that we're kind of organisations and communities that might just like to buck the trend. I'll come back to that. So, the next question is, what are we all doing here, and what am I doing here today? Well, part of the what is what's going on in society. And we all know that demographics are changing. It's been the basis of most of the talks that we've had today. There's this huge shift in an older population. In fact, that's what we're aiming for here in terms of people living to 100. But actually, that huge shift has provided some challenge and some difficulties, and it's often talked about in a negative way. Too many older people with too many things going wrong with them and not enough young people in society to do anything about it. But actually, what we see is this, because this is the news. That's old news. We all know that. This is the kind of things that are hitting the headlines today around older people. People at 100 jumping out of aeroplanes, doing extreme yoga, running marathons. My question now, though, is, are these people doing this independently, or are they doing this interdependently, with help from other people? And I suspect the answer is yes, they are. And that means us all changing our paradigm about you doing things to me, making me dependent, I doing things for myself, so I'm independent, and moving to the next level of community, which is we do things together. We are interdependent. And there's been talk today already about reciprocity, and again, I'll be talking a bit more about that later. So, we know that there are examples in nature already about where the sum of the parts creates something more than the individuals, and the hive is a great example of that. Last February, we were published in the Sunday Times following a piece of research that we'd had done at Whiteley Village. The title was Shangri-La in Surrey, where living to 100 is easy. That was a great headline grabber for us, but actually it was based on 2 years' worth of research which had been done by the Cass Business School, in fact the actuarial department of the Cass Business School, who'd spent 2 years at Whiteley Village going through every single record of every single person that had lived in that community over the last 100 years. They looked through our leather-bound ledgers, all the scripted handwriting, the dates people arrived, the dates people died, their occupation before they came, and all those kind of things they took away, ran through their machines and did the statistical analysis on. And guess what? People live longer at Whiteley, longer than the average of the England and Wales population. And we did that looking at different cohorts of 10 years over the whole of 100 years. What actually was happening in one of those cohorts, in fact in 1960, was that women at Whiteley Village were living 5 years longer than women in the general population. And given that we are a charity and we're there for people of limited means, we're talking about people from the lowest quintile living as long as people from the top quintile in terms of socioeconomic means. That's statistically very significant. And although we were having an effect on men, it wasn't quite as big, but over the period of time, we were able to see that Whiteley has changed people's longevity. And that's really an amazing statistic. So there's lots of questions now about why and what's been happening and how has that been achieved. What we also noticed when the statisticians were doing this piece of work was that we had a disproportionate number of centenarians. In fact, up until very recently, we had 11 centenarians in a population of 500 people. So quite remarkable things were happening in the community. And I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more now about how we think this is being achieved. In fact, I'm not going to talk about this. Bob's going to talk about this. Bob is one of our residents in the village, and he is going to tell you his story.
When I worked here in the 60s, I was a gardener. Used to do people getting together, joining up, friendship, doing things together. Whiteley Village is magnificent. It's unique.
Okay, that's just Bob's story. And Bob is one of our residents, as I say, and many of them are like Bob, and they're giving back to their community. So what we know is that Bob has purpose, he has responsibility, he has friends. He's living in an interconnected way across this community. But what we also know is that he feels safe, he feels connected, and he feels proud. And those, when we ask all of our residents, are the top 3 things that seem to make the most difference to people living in a community. And it's the things that most of them will cite as being different from anywhere else they've lived before. They're safe because they know they're going to be living in their own homes and they won't be taken away from them. They're connected because everybody knows everybody else. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. And actually, it's really important that they have an opportunity to feel proud of the village. And many of them are involved in the upkeep of the village, even things behind the scenes like Bob is. Many of them are out gardening, helping other people with their gardens, and making our 225 acres look as beautiful and as special as possible. And it's those spaces, and we've been talking about green spaces as well today, that make it such an important place, and I'm sure has an effect on people as well. But it's not just our space and our lovely homes that are an asset to us. We've got volunteers. They're actually a community asset, a huge community asset. People come in from outside to volunteer, but people who live in the village also volunteer. And between them, they run 23 different clubs and societies. They encourage people to come and be part of those things, from bowling to mahjong to line dancing. They do a lot of things together for the community as volunteers. And that's a really important element of our asset base. We also have families who are connected to our residents, families who don't live with us but come in and spend time in the village and do things with their relatives and the wider community. And we want to do more with them. We think they're a great asset, and we as a trust want to support them more so that they can do more with their relatives and the wider community. We've got a great staff base, and the staff base is quite small. In fact, we have more volunteers than we have staff. And we think that works quite well. That's something we want to build more of, because it's not about being able to afford lots more staff for older people. It's about the community generating support for itself. And the final thing I'd say is that it's great to have the opportunity to think about our volunteers in a way that is clearly using their basis of being a resident in the village and what they can do. So I'd like to talk to you about the example of Pam. Now, 2 years ago, we held a community meeting and we said, okay, who's got gifts and talents that they would like to give to this community? And a number of people put their hands up and gave us a whole host of things they'd done in their past, recognising their skills and saying that they would like to do something. This is the story of Pam, who at 85 put her hand up at the community meeting and said, well, I used to be an English teacher, not quite sure how that's going to help really, but happy to help if I can. So we all went away and scratched our heads, but of course it was really easy, wasn't it? We've got staff, many of them who come from abroad and speak English as a second language. Pam, since then, has been giving one-to-one individual English lessons to staff who have increased their ability to do their jobs better. They've grown in confidence. She has felt useful and purposeful with what she's doing, even though it was a skill she had from a long time ago. And of course, the whole community has benefited because our staff have actually been feeling good about what they can do and improved how they interact. So all of that tells us that this working together has a win-win-win effect. And just like the bees, the hive working together produces more. So this was a great experience for us, and Pam's one of our treasures and assets. And I'd like to finish off just by saying that, again, I'd like to go back to the comparison between what's going on here, or planning to go on here in Guernsey, and what we're already doing, but would like to do more of. Firstly, we are small islands in our little worlds, but actually small is great. It means you can do things at pace. You can get on, you haven't got to worry about including lots of people, and actually that gives you a real chance to try something, learn from it, move on, do something else. And that's really important. And I think you also know in a small community who your movers and shakers are. And it's really important to get those people on board right at the start and let them move and shake in their own way without controlling that. The second thing I would go back to is that, again, I've thought that we're very ambitious as communities, and I do think it's important to have ambition, and sometimes it's easy for others to kind of dampen that down and go, well, really, 100, do you really want to live to, well, maybe 95's okay. 95 would be good, wouldn't it? But, we really need ambition in order to change things, and it's really important that we work together in our communities to achieve ambition and to support the leaders of our communities who have that vision and that ambition and want to take us on a journey. The third thing, of course, around the passports is that's all about inclusion. You don't need a passport to be part of a community. There are no barriers. People are known for who they are, not what it says about them on a piece of paper. So let's use that to build our communities. And then finally, I would just go back to the pillar box situation. I do think that speaks to the heart of the matter. We're not afraid to try things that are different, neither here in Guernsey nor in Whiteley. And I leave that with the thought with you as I finish my talk today. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, forgotten. Yeah. So if anybody can tell me why this particular tree is the backdrop to my presentation, see me at the bar later and I'll buy you a drink. Thanks very much.